Hello and welcome to Maximum Evanescence, the first talking book about the band. It was written and researched by Ben Graham, music is by Amanda Thompson and it's read by Nancy McLean. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk.
Well, the band itself is Amy and I. We write everything, and we have a live band that includes another guitar player and a drummer, and we also have, a road crew that handles our electronics and technical matters on the road.
The sense of expectation is mounting. The audience stare at the darkened stage, waiting for the band to appear. One by one, hesitantly at first, they begin to chant a name. As more join in, the crowd becomes increasingly confident, and the chant rises to a roar as feet stamp against the floor and the auditorium vibrates to the rhythm of the two-syllable word they're repeating, over and over again. It is a name, but not the name of the band. It is a female name, a Christian name, the name of the lead singer. Amy, Amy. It echoes even backstage, translated to a dull and distant cacophony, as the band prepare finally to reveal themselves to the baying hordes. They exchange glances, not of surprise, or confusion, or even of annoyance, but simply of world-weary resignation. They have heard this chant before. In other cities, in other towns, in other theatres and arenas, on the seemingly never-ending world tour they've been engaged in ever since they became famous. Whatever that means, they wonder, as they take in the army of technicians, road crew, extra musicians, press and record company people that surrounds them now, at all times. It's certainly a long way from Little Rock, Arkansas, they may reflect, as the lights dim and the chanting out front suddenly explodes into a celebratory cheer. Back then, they were officially unknown, but at least those people who did know them acknowledged them as a band. Sure, sometimes they were that band with a chick singer, but usually it was only disinterested parties and the terminally unhip who called them that. To everyone else, they were simply Evanescence. Who were Evanescence now? They were the band with that song, from the hit movie soundtrack, the song that got them compared to Linkin Park because of the rap rock vocal, added as an afterthought in a spare half hour by a guest singer who'd never even performed live with the group. They were the saviours of nu metal, whatever that was, a genre they'd never asked to be associated with in the first place. Depending on who you asked, they were either sinister Christian evangelists or servants of the Antichrist, doom-obsessed serious artists, or manufactured pop-pap. They were suddenly one of the biggest bands in the world, yet everyone expected them to have vanished into the ether by tomorrow, as their name suggested. And, still more than ever, they were that band with a chick singer, Amy Lee, lead vocalist and co-founder, and unwitting sex symbol to millions. Unbelievably, for a group thought of as being an overnight sensation, Amy had founded Evanescence with Ben Moody almost a decade earlier. True, they were both barely into their teens at the time, and the number of shows that they'd played prior to their current tour could probably be counted on the fingers of one hand. Success had happened slowly and then suddenly, and no one could say that they hadn't had plenty of time to prepare for it. They knew who they were as a band and as people. They were grounded and had a strong sense of their own identity. It was the rest of the world that was going to have to catch up. The lights flash back on. The band are on stage. The cheering becomes ecstatic, almost hysterical, and the guitarists grin over at each other as they slam into a pulverizing heavy metal riff, the drums pounding away behind them as, up front, Amy Lee dances herself into the spaces between the music. When she begins to sing, it's in the voice of an angel soaring over the flames of hell, a voice that mingles innocence with loss, optimism with deep regret, strength with surrender, salvation with damnation. It's a voice that, ultimately, is what sets Evanescence apart from their peers, and deep down, the band know it. They know that Amy is bound to be the centre of attention, not just for her gender or her appearance, but for her talent. That, after all, is why Ben has been working with her for so long, and one of the reasons why the others are just grateful to be aboard. So they play. They play the songs they wrote a year ago, and the songs they wrote 5 years ago, the songs they have dedicated their young lives to. And an hour or so later, they leave the audience thrilled, sated, and a little better acquainted with what Evanescence are all about. They know now that there's more to them than just a pretty face, a soaring vocal, and another kick-ass radio anthem. That there's a band of substance and of subtlety, of raging extremes, of passion and commitment. The name of the band is Evanescence, and this time, it's one that they're unlikely to forget.
We met when I was in 7th grade or something and started writing music together.
Yeah.
So
actually, one of the songs in the Daredevil soundtrack, we finished when we were 15.
The ballad that's on there.
We were 15, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Arkansas is a hard-working, God-fearing state, perhaps best known in recent times for giving us the only Democrat president of the United States of America of the last 20 years. But, Bill Clinton aside, this southern state, right in the heart of what is popularly referred to as the Bible Belt, has made little contribution towards world culture, politics, arts, or entertainment. This is perhaps not to be unduly held against it. After all, as far as states go, Arkansas is tiny. Roughly 1 million people call it home, and half of those reside in Little Rock, its capital. A village by most standards, Little Rock is nevertheless proud to be Arkansas's principal city, the place where everything happens. Like many things down here, it's all a question of perspective. For the kids growing up there in the 1990s, Little Rock certainly lived up to its name. There was Little Rock, and even less roll in the city, where everyone knew your name and knew where your parents lived. Where there was a church on every corner, and only one bar come pizza parlour, Vino's, that gave even a passing nod to what might be called alternative culture. Otherwise, you could join the local jocks in getting drunk, tripping over sleeping cows, and making out with the school cheerleaders to the age-old riffs of Leonard Skinner and ZZ Top. Or you could join the church youth group and get to travel around and interact with other young people under the watchful eye of adult authority. Either path led to the same eventual destination, conformity, an early marriage, and a steady job with a local firm, wild oats long since sowed. But what if you wanted something more? What if you were young and disaffected with the safe, suffocating adult culture you saw around you? What if the scent of hypocrisy and slow desperation made you feel alienated and alone, and some artistic impulse inside that they'd been unable to stifle told you that you were different? How to express your creativity and uniqueness when it was hard enough to avoid getting beaten up and ostracized if you looked just a little bit weird? The staid social establishment of Little Rock naturally bred its fair share of goths, metalheads, stoners and freaks, who were all out to rebel against the tight-knit community around them. Some drifted into drugs, despair and petty crime, and lost their way completely. But others turned their adolescent energies to something more creative. They wrote, they painted, and they formed bands. Ben Moody and Amy Lee first met at a church-run summer camp in rural Arkansas in 1994. He was 14, performing there with a local praise and worship group, while she was a regular camper, 13, and just moved to the state with her family from Illinois. Shy, awkward, and insecure, she was also a precocious talent, inward-looking and self-reliant, yet at the same time a frustrated exhibitionist. Moody recalls that he first saw and heard her during a particularly dull and dreary basketball game in the camp gymnasium. He was sat, bored to tears, watching the game, when he suddenly became aware of someone playing the piano, set on the small stage beside the gym floor. It was Amy, performing a particularly soulful and note-perfect rendition of Meat Loaf's complex classic of pop rock kitsch, "I Would Do Anything for Love, But I Won't Do That." Captivated, Moody ran straight over and introduced himself. They got to talking about music, art and so on, and discovered that they had similar tastes. Ben too was a musician, a guitarist, but he'd never before found anyone that he could really communicate his ideas to, let alone envisage collaborating with. But soon he and Amy found themselves working out songs together. Whilst demonstrating the chords to a Smashing Pumpkins tune, Amy sang the melody to Ben. It was the first time he had heard her sing, and it was another epiphany. Amy's voice was amazing, and Ben knew that this was the person he'd been looking for. Half-jokingly, he recalls that he quickly made her promise never to work with anyone else. She was all his, and with that, a beautiful partnership commenced.
Ben and I just wrote music for like 7 years. I mean, we actually just didn't try to get a record deal for a good like 5 or 6 years. But more than anything, we just like sat in Ben's apartment, me in the closet doing vocals, just like recording and writing and making yourselves better, and getting the whole band established.
Ben and Amy didn't instantly form Evanescence, but they did almost immediately begin writing and playing songs together, and gradually developed a shared vision of what they wanted their music to sound like. Their joint influences and inspirations included Nirvana, Nine Inch Nails, Korn, Björk, Radiohead, Sting, Portishead, Type O Negative and Tori Amos. But the artist they were most enthused about, who they most wished to emulate and maybe work with one day, was the film's soundtrack composer, Danny Elfman. Elfman is best known for his work with director Tim Burton, whose eccentric, individual and darkly humorous films owe much of their eerie atmosphere to Elfman's unique scores. Quirky, unsettling, epic and emotionally uplifting without being corny, Elfman's music to accompany films such as The Nightmare Before Christmas, Batman and Edward Scissorhands represent a form of contemporary orchestral gothic that struck a distinctly moody minor chord in Ben and Amy's hearts. Like many others, they also enjoyed his work with cult alternative rock group Oingo Boingo, whose fans had also included the young Kurt Cobain. The cinematic and orchestral sweep of Elfman's work, with its beguiling darkness, was central to the music Ben and Amy saw themselves making. Artists like Portishead and Enigma suggested ways that this music could be fused with hip-hop beats and electronic rhythms without losing its lush, elegiac atmosphere. If they could then fuse this with the gothic rock and heavy metal that was their first love, while maintaining the complex and sophisticated level of songwriting that Amy was developing at the piano, topped with her otherworldly vocals, well, then they'd really be onto something. From the beginning, Evanescence set out to combine aggression and power with beauty and introspection, to create dark, heavy rock that nevertheless conveyed a positive message of hope. Their name means a dissipation, something fleeting and vanishing, dispersing like a vapour. It's also right next to evangelism in the dictionary, which may or may not be a coincidence, as Ben and Amy's shared Christian faith was also an important element in their conception of the band. Ben in particular was a committed Christian who had thought long and hard about his spiritual beliefs. "We're just sick of being bombarded with catchy riffs that have no depth or meaning behind them," he told Stranger Things magazine in 1999, shortly after the release of their debut EP. The message we as a band want to convey more than anything is simple: God is love. He went on to say how he felt that bigotry and intolerance amongst people who called themselves Christians created more atheists than anything else, and how he personally felt God was non-judgmental. "We hope to express in our music that Christianity is not a rigid list of rules to follow," he said. "All of our songs are not about rainbows and sunshine. Sometimes it rains. Who can we help if we won't even talk about it? No one is alone." Ben and Amy were spurred on by their competitive instincts. Whenever one would write a song that they were particularly proud of, the other would try to better it. Eventually, they realised that they had enough good material to form a band. Initially, though, other members recruited never seemed to last. They came on board and then just as quickly departed, unable to share the core duo's vision or penetrate their insular creative partnership. So they wrote and recorded their songs themselves, overdubbing all the parts, with Ben playing guitars and drums, as well as programming the electronic parts, while Amy sang and played piano and keyboards. And, very occasionally, they would venture out live, hiring local musicians from Arkansas's burgeoning Christian rock and metal scene to accompany them for the night. Then, like their name suggested, they would fade away once more, dispersing silently back into the night.
That other stuff was done in our home, just locally, just to kind of get a buzz around our hometown. We had to leave because there's only, there's
only so much room.
Yeah, people don't know. I mean, this isn't very common around here, like for bands to put, most of it is heavy metal.
Well, yeah, and there's not a lot of, bands from here because it's just a small place, I mean, and I'm from all over, and we're just sort of, different, open-minded people, I guess.
Evanescence released their first EP in December 1998 at a show they played at Vino's Rock Club and Pizza Parlour. Little more than a demo, it was limited to 100 CDRs, although backed by local indie label Bigwig Enterprises. It sold out that same night. The Evanescence EP, as it was known, consisted of 7 songs, all written and performed by Ben and Amy, although the song Solitude featured William Boyd on bass, rhythm guitar and backing vocals, along with Matt Outlaw on drums, while the song Understanding featured drummer Rocky Gray, then in Christian death metal band Soul Embraced. The band reworked Understanding for their second EP, variously known as Whisper or Sound Asleep, both songs featured on the CD, and released in 1999. Another CDR, this time limited to just 50 copies, it showcased a variety of different styles: acoustic, goth, electronica, and atmospheric metal. Despite its limited release, the EP nevertheless began to receive airplay on local radio station KABF Little Rock. DJ Brad Cavinus had given Understanding a spin at something like 3 a.m. and was astonished to be inundated with calls from Arkansas's night people demanding to know what it was, who it was by, and to hear it again. Soon, that song and Give Unto Me, Sound Asleep, were virtually on heavy rotation, and everyone was talking about the mysterious enigma of Evanescence, this huge local band who no one knew and who hardly ever played live. The band themselves describe Understanding as this ridiculous 7-minute goth anthem that was actually only the second song they wrote together. A plea to recognise and accept the pain and loneliness we must all go through in life, it obviously resonated deeply with many, as did Give Unto Me, with its offer to carry a loved one's burden for them. The Evanescence EP also featured an early version of Imaginary that the band would later rewrite and re-record for the Fallen album. It was around this time that Evanescence expanded to a trio, as David Hodges joined on keyboards as a full-time member. Ben, a notorious perfectionist, found it almost impossible to collaborate with anyone, but at the time he said that David was probably the only other person besides Amy that I could work with musically in this band. The remainder of 1999 was spent in building their own studio in Ben's basement, and it was here that the band recorded their first album, 2000's Origin. Origin was released on November 4th, 2000, at a show at Little Rock's River Market Pavilion. Its 11 tracks included Where Will You Go from the first EP, as well as new versions of Whisper, Imaginary and My Immortal. Again released on Bigwig Enterprises, it soon sold out. The band's popularity was actually boosted enormously by their enigmatic status, although this was accidental. It was because we could never afford to play a show, Ben later recalled. Evanescence may well have remained a local phenomenon, however, if producer Pete Matthews hadn't overheard Origin while Ben was mixing it at a professional studio in Memphis, Tennessee. He stuck his head round the door and asked if he could take a copy with him as he was going to New York and Los Angeles next month to meet with record companies. Evanescence agreed and soon forgot all about it, until, a few months later, they received a call from Wind Up Records, an imprint of the Sony Corporation and best known for the huge success of Christian rock band Creed. They began negotiations, and other labels, seeing that Wind Up was interested, also began offering the band deals. But Evanescence stuck with the first to show faith, and by the beginning of 2001, they had signed with Wind Up and relocated to Los Angeles. There, they assumed, to begin immediate work on their debut album proper. But this was not to happen so easily.
When we were actually in college looking for hire-ons to play in our live band, we put up flyers and described our band as the bastard child of Sarah McLachlan and Trent Reznor.
But, I mean, we're influenced by everything. I think the reasons that there's, those two extremes is we try to hit the whole spectrum. I mean, this is our first song, and there's definitely more styles that we're influenced by that come out in our music yet to come. But we just listen to, we're so open-minded. Music is our life.
Evanescence, having already recorded and released 3 CDs worth of their own music, which they'd been working on for nearly 6 years, naturally thought that on signing with a major record label, they'd go straight to the studio to record an album, either a follow-up to or a reworking of their self-produced Origin debut. The record company, however, knew better. It would be another 2 years before the band could begin work on what would become the multi-platinum hit album Fallen. 2 years in Los Angeles, in which Evanescence would be transformed completely. It was what was known as artist development. Wind Up Records already perceived Evanescence as potential global superstars, but they knew that despite their claims, they were far from ready for the pressures and the output that this would entail. The band members were all still teenagers, who had led somewhat sheltered lives among the mere 1 million inhabitants of their native rural state. In LA, they would be exposed to sins that their local church barely knew existed, and find that there, and throughout the industry they were about to enter, such behaviours were considered part of the normal run of life. The painfully shy Amy Lee, despite her voice and songwriting talents, was hardly ready to handle the chores and responsibilities of frontsperson for a major rock group. She was sent to 2 years of acting and performance classes to boost her self-esteem, while she and Ben spent every day in the studio, writing new material, rehearsing and honing their craft. By the time Evanescence went into the studio to record Fallen, they once more consisted of the core duo, Ben and Amy, assisted for the duration of the record by Josh Freese of A Perfect Circle. Rumour has it that he played the same snare that Dave Grohl played on Nevermind. David Hodges, however, had left the band, as once again the telepathic creative bubble surrounding Ben and Amy remained inviolate. The first thing that strikes you about Fallen is that it's a huge sounding record. 8 of its 11 songs feature a 44-piece string section, and every one is layered with an expensive sounding FM radio sheen. Orchestras, choirs, massed Godzilla guitars, and preposterously epic choruses abound, all piled up on top of each other. Lyrical themes of obsessive love, escapism and loneliness abound. The metallic crunch of Going Under sets the tone immediately, sounding like a hybrid of Garbage and Pat Benatar, before the piano intro of Bring Me to Life explodes into its Linkin Park-like chorus, courtesy of guest vocalist Paul McCoy of fellow Wind Up Records artists 12 Stones. The guitar stutter on the first bridge also recalls Radiohead's early classic Creep. Everybody's Fool is like an 80s goth folk band, all about Eve crossed with industrial rockers Ministry, while piano ballad My Immortal has echoes of a less bombastic Celine Dion and Madonna's Live to Tell. Lyrically, it seems to be about being devotedly in love with someone who never really loved you back, and how now that they've left, you still feel the same way, and always will. The following, Haunted, then tells the same story from the other person's point of view, expressing feelings of being hounded by an obsessive stalker. Tourniquet is actually a cover of the song My Tourniquet by Soul Embraced, written by drummer Rocky Gray, who had also been playing with Evanescence since their first EP. It's the only song on the album specifically about God and religion, questioning whether a suicide, even by one who'd accepted Christ into his heart, can ever be saved and ascend into heaven. The orchestral coda fades directly into the powerful reworking of that old favourite, Imaginary, which is either about not wanting to get out of bed in the morning or, more universally, about escaping into a fantasy world inside your head. Taking Over Me and My Last Breath again sound like a cross between All About Eve and Linkin Park, while the latter uses a retro synth effect that recalls Scandinavian 80s pop gods a-ha. Hello is another moody piano ballad with an Enya-esque vocal, although it draws on the song 1959 from the Sisters of Mercy's Floodland album. In fact, the shadow of the Sisters, especially their later albums co-produced by Jim Steinman of Meat Loaf fame, hangs heavy over Fallen. Their uber-goth anthems such as This Corrosion surely inspiring Evanescence's fusion of massed choirs and orchestral pomp with dark, pulverizing guitar rock. The album concludes with a revisited Whisper, as Metallica guitars, mounting choruses, swelling strings and church choirs chanting operatically in Latin come together one last time in an epic climax. Religious or not, this album sounds positively godlike.
Fox came to our record label for, the songs for the soundtrack, and then it wasn't all bands on our label, obviously, but they were both kind of responsible, and they were looking for a female singer in a rock group, which is kind of unusual, and to represent Elektra's character in the movie. So when they were like, well, hey, we have one on our roster, check out Evanescence, and they loved it, so.
With Fallen ready to go, Evanescence had to find ways of getting it heard. Radio initially was reluctant to start playing tracks, perhaps fearing that they sounded too dark, too different, to sit alongside their usual fare. Evanescence were different, all right, but Wind Up had no intention of letting them remain as merely an alternative band. They wanted to break them right into the mainstream. So gradually they persuaded stations to play an Evanescence song just once, even in the middle of the night. They had a good idea what the result would be, knowing what the reaction had been when local radio in Little Rock had given Evanescence's earliest demos just one spin in the graveyard shift. People responded. Stations were inundated with calls for up to half an hour after the track was played, wanting to know the name of the band. Naturally enough, the station played them again. Meanwhile, the record company and the band's publishers were also trying to interest movie companies in Evanescence's songs to get them featured on a suitable soundtrack. This is standard practice nowadays, as most Hollywood blockbusters have a spin-off soundtrack album of contemporary artists, and many relative unknowns have made their first appearance under the banner Music Featured in and Inspired by the Film. Many others, however, never get picked, as the number of struggling bands wanting to get noticed obviously far outweighs the output of major movies, and consequently, competition is fierce. But every so often, a song and a film meet up and work together so well that it soon becomes impossible to imagine them apart. So it was with not one, but two Evanescence songs from Fallen and the noirish superhero spectacular Daredevil. Arriving in the midst of a string of successful Marvel comic book adaptations, Spider-Man and the X-Men franchise and the Incredible Hulk, Daredevil revolved around the masked, red leather-clad vigilante of the title, who was blinded by radioactive waste as a child, but awoke in hospital to find that his other senses had been boosted to extraordinary levels, and that he'd also developed some kind of radar. Hard physical training and the murder of his washed-up boxer father did the rest, and the moody, Hell's Kitchen-born Irish Catholic boy, Matt Murdock, went on to become an idealistic lawyer by day and a costumed avenger of injustice by night. Tragic love interest come adversary, Elektra, was retained from the critically acclaimed Frank Miller comic book, as was the villainous Kingpin and his psychopathic assassin Bullseye. However, while referencing many iconic moments from the comic's 40-year history, the film trod an uneasy line between the dark, gritty realism of the original and the computer-generated effects and Matrix-style fight sequences seemingly required of a 21st century blockbuster. Arguably, it was Evanescence's song, Bring Me to Life, which, when it appears on the soundtrack as both Elektra and Daredevil are renewing themselves and preparing to do battle, best merged these two elements into a coherent, satisfying whole. Just as their hero, Danny Elfman, had done for the superhero adaptation that Daredevil most resembled, Tim Burton's Batman, so Evanescence distilled and heightened the atmosphere of the film through their music. In many modern films with contemporary rock soundtracks, the songs are there simply to cover the cracks, to provide some free advertising for another of the company's products, or simply as a thoughtless, unnecessary add-on. Rare indeed is the song that adds to the art of the movie itself, but both of Evanescence's contributions to Daredevil do just that, leaving many fans and critics alike wishing that they'd got to score the whole film. Director Mark Steven Johnson had liked Bring Me to Life, recognised its potential and had already agreed to use it when he heard My Immortal. Immediately he knew that the song was tailor-made for the funeral of Elektra's father, murdered by Bullseye on Kingpin's orders, and so setting in motion the full tragic denouement of the story. In the film, the song was subtitled Voice of Elektra, as not only does it musically capture the emotion of the scene, but the lyrics could almost be interpreted as Elektra's inner monologue, summing up all of her complex emotions of grief, longing and anger at her father's death. Evanescence's music undoubtedly contributed greatly to Daredevil's success, but if anything, the favours the film did the band were even greater. Daredevil announced Evanescence's presence to the world before they'd released a real record in their own right. Before it was even out, before anyone had had a chance to see them live, the demand for Evanescence's debut album was enormous. Many bands would have fallen under the weight of expectation. Evanescence, however, took it all in their stride.
It's been pretty sudden that everything has happened. I mean, we did just release our record and we were, virtually nobody, a year ago, we just in our hometown. So yeah, it's strange. You gotta kind of adjust real fast.
Evanescence announced itself to the world at large in 2003 as a four-piece band. Ben Moody and Amy Lee were joined full-time by drummer Rocky Gray, ex-Soul Embraced and fellow Arkansas death metalers Living Sacrifice, and writer of Tourniquet, and guitarist John LeCompte, ex-Mind Rage. The new-look Evanescence's first public appearance was in the big-budget video for the first single, Bring Me to Life. Set against the backdrop of a computer-generated cityscape drawn directly from the Daredevil film, it features Amy tossing and turning in bed as she experiences nightmares of falling from tall buildings in a flimsy nightdress. Meanwhile, the band, with guest vocalist Paul McCoy, are performing in a neighbouring apartment. For the second verse, she begins sleepwalking along the high window ledge, past various windows and the scenes happening behind them. A man in a near stupor in front of a television, a party, and so on. Finally, she reaches the apartment where the band are playing, where Paul sees her and attempts to catch her before she falls, but ultimately fails. Bring Me to Life was soon on heavy rotation on MTV, and the track was released as a single, backed by the songs Further Away and Missing. It was already gathering near saturation radio play as a promo from the Daredevil soundtrack, and as soon as it was officially released, in February of 2003, it began to race up the singles charts. When the album followed a month later, it repeated the single's success, mostly, it has to be said, on the strength of that one song. Linkin Park meets Lacuna Coil, the critics said of Bring Me to Life, immediately pushing Evanescence into a rap rock, new metal bracket where they never belonged. The staccato, barked male vocal on Bring Me to Life, never really a rap, was provided by Paul McCoy, who flew in, added it to the track in half an hour, then rejoined his band, 12 Stones, on tour, returning only to shoot the video, which remains the single time he has performed with Evanescence. His presence on the song is, in a sense, a red herring, a welcome addition, but in no way representative of the sound of the group as a whole. Many critics and pop pundits have suggested that the people who bought Fallen bought it for that one unrepresentative song, an observation which, if true, hardly bodes well for Evanescence's long-term career. It's a theory supported by their relatively modest concert attendances compared to their world-conquering record sales. Put simply, Evanescence haven't had the slow, steady climb to the top that builds up a large and loyal grassroots following, the kind that comes to all the shows, buys the albums, and sustains a long-term career. Instead, they've exploded suddenly, generating huge and possibly short-term success. Amy Lee sees it differently. I think that people like the songs, and then they listen to the songs, and then they like us as a band, she explained patiently to Kerrang! Magazine. Because there's so much in the songs for people to hold on to. I think that will be the secret of our longevity. Whatever the case, after years of being the big fish in the very small pond of Little Rock, Arkansas, Evanescence were now selling records by the million, topping singles and album charts in America and across the world, and dominating both MTV and the radio airwaves. And in the process, they were attracting fans who took the band straight to their hearts, who fell in love with both the darkness and the light behind it. Evanescence had arrived, and they had the world at their feet. But trouble was just around the corner.
I hope that our music isn't mindless. I mean, not that we're just an oasis for many kind of problems, because obviously our music, the point is more like to address your problems and to work through them rather than ignore them.
But yeah, well, also, I like to keep the political statements to bands that are way more intelligent than I. Tom Morello, for instance, and that sort of thing. I mean, he's much more eloquent and much more educated, and so political statements are best kept to artists like that. And to us youngins, we just play music.
The rumour began soon after Fallen was released, that Evanescence, like labelmates Creed, were a Christian rock band, but one that was not prepared to admit it in public. They had a secret, sinister agenda. They were pushing a covert Christian message in the guise of orchestral goth metal angst, traditionally the preserve of Satanists and unbelievers. They were in fact legally obliged not to comment on their Christian faith, according to the terms of their record contract. The band was straightforward in their denial, flatly insisting that they were not a Christian band and Fallen was not a Christian record. Certainly, the accusations quickly unravel when looked at closely. How exactly would a band attempt to convert its fans to Christianity by not admitting to being Christians or mentioning Christianity in their lyrics? And what's so sinister about Christianity anyway, that it dare not speak its name? And why would Wind Up Records, home to the openly Christian band Creed, ban Evanescence from revealing their Christianity? Yet the fact remains that throughout their early history, Evanescence had close links with America's widespread Christian rock network, and were open about their personal faith and beliefs, and how it affected their work. Fallen's sleeve gives thanks to Jesus, stating that all the life left in me is you. Since they became famous, however, they've repeatedly denied any Christian element or influence in their music, most notoriously in a feature interview with the April 15th issue of Entertainment Weekly magazine. We're actually high on the Christian charts, and I'm like, well, what the fuck are we even doing there? Ben said, while Amy added, I guarantee that if the Christian bookstore owners listened to some of those songs, they wouldn't sell the CD. There are people hell-bent on the idea that we're a Christian band in disguise, and that we have some secret message. We have no spiritual affiliation with this music. It's simply about life experience. Wind Up Records preempted the interview with a press release issued 5 days before the magazine hit the stands. In it, they commented on the label's decision to recall all copies of Fallen from Christian music stores, Christian radio stations, and Christian charts. Retail and other outlets were given 2 months to return all Evanescence material, and were actually banned from stocking them in the future. But in fact, many pulled Evanescence themselves overnight. Despite having roots within the Christian community prior to the release of Fallen, the press release stated, recent statements by band members have made it abundantly clear that Evanescence is a secular band, and as such view their music as entertainment. No more, no less. The band is now opposed to promoting or supporting any religious agenda. The decision to release Fallen into the Christian market was made subsequent to discussions with and approval by the artist. Obviously, the band has had a change in their perspective, as well as changes within the band itself as relates to new band members. It seems clear from this that Evanescence themselves chose to distance the band from the Christian rock movement, and that if anything, their record company tried to dissuade them. Up to this point, the band had received substantial support from the Christian community. Their first website was hosted at JesusFreak.com, and another Christian site, DrugstoreJesus.com, called Fallen the best Christian rock album ever produced, period. It added that it managed to do what Creed and Lifehouse have been trying to do for years. Anyone who listens to this modern rock album and doesn't sense God in it somewhere is literally fooling themselves. They even interpreted the band's name as being somehow a comparison to the lives of Christians everywhere, as well as the key event in end times prophecy when millions of people vanish all over the world. Since the band's denials, however, Christian music sites have been up in arms over whether the band should be metaphorically or literally stoned, condemned, and set upon with righteous anger, or simply prayed for as sheep that have strayed from the flock. Ben attempted to clarify his comments in a second interview when he stated that Amy and I are Christians, but we are not a Christian band. We write about a number of things, just things we experience in life. Because our spirituality is a big part of our lives, it comes through in our music. But our lives are our ministry. Our music is just a way to convey the message to those who listen, that they are not alone. And that seems to have been Evanescence's message all along. Yes, they are Christians, but no, they're not trying to force their beliefs down anyone's throats. And they have had nothing to do with the so-called Christian hypocrites who use their faith as a way to spread hatred against homosexuals or any other part of society, a point Ben made clear as far back as 1999. None of their recorded output to date has any overt Christian message, with the exception of the soul-embraced cover Tourniquet, and as such, they're quite right to insist that they don't want to be pigeonholed as a Christian rock band. They're a rock band who just happen to be Christians. And why should anybody have a problem with that?
Well, my whole life I just loved making noise. And my father actually, when I was a little kid, I was up till 3 or 4 in the morning. When I was 6 or 7 every night listening to his band rehearse, he played bar gigs till, all hours of the night, about 4 or 5 nights a week. So I was around it all my life. And so it was only a matter of time before, I picked an instrument and started going to town.
Evanescence played their initial live performances a couple of years after Ben and Amy's first fateful meeting at youth camp. These were acoustic shows as a duo in Little Rock coffee shops, and gave little indication of the full-on rock experience into which an Evanescence gig would eventually mature. Gradually, as they began recording tracks in Ben's basement studio and releasing their own CDs, they realised the need to play live occasionally to promote their music and get it directly to the people. For these early shows, which would number maybe half a dozen or so scattered over 4 years, rarely if ever outside of their hometown, they would hire extra musicians for the night, paying them either $20 or buying them dinner afterwards. It was an inauspicious start for a band that would eventually be praised for redefining the live concert experience. Evanescence's upward trajectory was steep and sudden. Following their signing to Wind Up Records and their LA apprenticeship, their appearance on the Daredevil soundtrack and the huge success of Bring Me to Life and Fallen instantly propelled them into the big league, and the demand for them to perform live was overwhelming. Embarking on a worldwide tour in 2003, they found themselves headlining the main stages of festivals in towns where they'd previously played the local bar and grill for only a few dollars. In spite of this, reviews of their spring US tour were almost unanimously positive, from fans and critics alike. All agreed that the band were able to reproduce the sound of the album with unerring accuracy, a slap in the face to those who considered its polished surface the result of expensive production rather than consummate musicianship. And even to those who'd lived with and loved the record for a while, live, Amy's vocals were a revelation. Soaring operatically over the aggressive grind of the guitars, her sweet yet strong high harmonies contrasted perfectly with the low-end rhythms beneath. The band themselves were surprised that no one had made this connection before, after hearing how well these two opposites worked together. Amy's vocals at once softened the pill for older rock fans and younger pop kids who might otherwise have found Evanescence's relentless throb too hard-edged, and at the same time breathed new life into a type of sound that was on its way to becoming a new metal cliché, however powerful it may still be. Importantly, Amy also feminized a type of music that has traditionally been a very male preserve, testosterone-driven rock metal that can be off-putting or unnerving for female fans. Thanks to Amy, here was a modern hard rock band that girls could get into, that didn't sacrifice mystery, beauty or romance in the pursuit of cathartic noise and swaggering dynamics. Evanescence had both, plus a strong female role model to boot. Despite sometimes dressing like a saucy French maid on stage, and at other times like a Victorian dominatrix, as imagined by Tim Burton, surely the inspiration for her trademark stripy armbands, Amy Lee is nobody's passive fantasy model. This was best demonstrated at a show at New York's Webster Hall, when she emerged to the dispiriting Neanderthal war cry of "Show us your tits," coming from the depths of the audience. "Who in here doesn't want me to show them my tits?" Amy responded, to roars of support from the majority of the crowd. "I'm so sick and tired of seeing girls get up here and show their tits," she continued, and her fans loved her for it. Live, Evanescence performed nearly all of Fallen, plus tracks such as Even in Death from the Origin LP and the B-side to Bring Me to Life, Farther Away, with its distinctive opening guitar solo. Predictably, it's Bring Me to Life itself which receives the loudest response of the night. The audience and even the security staff singing along with every word. Evanescence also drop in at least one cover version, usually Zero by the Smashing Pumpkins, although towards the end of the tour they were also toying with Metallica's Enter Sandman, and at London's Astoria, Nirvana's Heart-Shaped Box cropped up mid-set. Other songs they've been known to play include Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, Only Happy When It Rains by Garbage, Sex Type Thing by Stone Temple Pilots, and Low Self-Esteem by The Offspring. My Immortal is normally reserved for the encore, when Amy returns to the stage alone and starts singing and playing it on her keyboard, before the rest of the band come in on the bridge, giving it a harder, fuller sound than on record. Despite the changes though, Evanescence are essentially still the same band that would occasionally grace the stage at Vino's in Little Rock back in the late 90s. They're still built around the core duo of Ben and Amy, who exchange teasing banter between songs on stage and often compete for the crowd's affections, a game that Amy invariably wins hands down. And the rest of the group have also been with them intermittently since their earliest days, with Rocky Gray and John LeCompte augmented on stage by bassist William Boyd, whose association stretches back to playing on the band's debut Evanescence EP. As the stages get bigger and their audience grows wider, the bonds between them only grow stronger. Evanescence are in it for the long haul.
been together for a long time.
About 6 or 7 years.
Probably been about that long that we've been writing music together. I just turned 21 last Friday. I come from a musical family. You know, my dad always taught all of us kids guitar, and we all sang together. And Ben's from a very musical family, too. So I guess just always, I mean, this is what I love, is writing music and singing and playing music.
At the tender age of just 21, Amy Lee has found herself in the curious position of being a role model for girls who are barely younger than she is, if at all. It's an odd situation, and one that's been thrust upon her rather than sought out. But if anyone knows how to handle it, it's Amy. Level-headed and strong-willed, she's determined that if girls are going to look up to her, then she's going to be a positive, even feminist icon. Her own heroines are the likes of Shirley Manson of Garbage and Chrissie Hynde from The Pretenders, rather than Britney Spears and her kind. Strong, intelligent women who know what they want and refuse to compromise their integrity. I respect myself, I always have, Amy told MTV. I don't think there's any reason for some of the stuff that women celebrities do. It's a real shame, and it offends me because you're representing me. We're all women. We're in this together. She goes on to say how disappointed she is when almost every female entertainer eventually resorts to selling her body. Every time a cool rock chick or actress seems to respect themselves as a strong woman, I'm like, yeah, and I love them, and they're my girls. And then they start to go downhill, and people aren't paying attention anymore. So they start stripping their clothes off, because that's all they have left. I swear to everything I've ever known, I will never do that. Amy was always encouraged to believe in herself and her abilities from day one. Her father John once attempted to make it as a musician himself before becoming a well-known radio personality around Little Rock. He continually gave her advice and told her to stick with it. Amy still recalls that the most useful thing anyone told her about the business came from her father. He said, "Don't forget that at the end of the day, it's all about the music, and make sure you enjoy it while it's happening. None of the other stuff really matters." Family and friends are important to Amy. Much has been made of the song she wrote for them called You, which has appeared on several Evanescence fan websites. But the song was a personal, private recording by Amy for her family, which is completely separate from her work with Evanescence. Her unique mix of independence, self-reliance, and family loyalty can partly be attributed to losing her 3-year-old sister when she herself was just 6. As a child, Amy was a self-confessed drama queen who used to pretend to be dead in order to attract attention. She would try to get her mother to call the police and then burst into tears when she didn't. A natural artist who spends her free time painting and writing, Amy also designs her own clothes, such as the corset she wears in the video for Going Under, which cost her £2,500 to have made. Her inspiration comes equally from the worlds of heavy rock and Victoriana fantasy, and she likes to mix the two, incorporating leather, metal and chains with lacy material and old-fashioned design. At one concert, she came on stage dressed as a fairy, just because people had told her that she couldn't. Amy loves Missy Elliott, Eminem, Michael Jackson, Enya, Janis Joplin and Mozart, whose Requiem is her favourite piece of music ever. A classically trained pianist and a member of the school choir who twice reached all-state status, Amy was nevertheless glad to leave Little Rock and move to Los Angeles. "I'm so much more comfortable in California," she says. "Little Rock is such a small town, and everybody talks about you, especially if you're different. We definitely faced a lot of prejudice and judgment from people there, but here it isn't like that because everybody looks different." Nevertheless, Amy has found it easy to resist the temptations of drink and drugs that are part of the freewheeling Los Angeles scene. She was never really into partying and dancing in clubs, preferring to spend time on her own, working on her art. Such are the contradictions and the strength of character at the heart of Amy Lee.
We just recently finally got our bus, so it's a total wreck, and all I do is clean up after them. Sorry, but it's true. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. Anyway, I love the boys. I couldn't do without them.
If anything, Ben Moody comes across to the outside observer of the Evanescence camp as even more mysterious than Amy Lee. Partly this is because she's so much more the public face of the band than he is, although both will be the first to tell you that they're very much an equal partnership. Of course, there are those who insist that the partnership is more than just musical and creative. Those who find it hard to believe that the pair, having been close friends for so long and working so intimately together, could possibly do so without the relationship developing to a more romantic and physical level. The rumours, however, remain just that, rumours. Ben and Amy are just good friends, and their relationship is that of brother and sister. Amy would always be trying to impress Ben when they were younger. He remembers calling round at her house to be greeted by her coming down the steps like something from a Bette Davis movie, in a huge petticoat that she stole from school. It's true as well that Ben took Amy to her senior prom at school, but they have never been a couple. In fact, close-knit as they are, there are times when the air between Ben and Amy can get a little frosty. In an interview for Kerrang! Magazine, Amy contradicted Ben's answers to questions and forbade him from telling the journalist a particular anecdote. But perhaps the singer has reason to keep an eye on what the guitarist says to the press. Where she is guarded and professional, Ben can be overly trusting and spontaneous. He's the one most likely to say what he feels without considering the consequences. It was he who stirred up the whole controversy regarding their Christian faith, first by talking perhaps too openly about it to the press in their early days, and insisting that the message of the band was that God is love, then later denying that Evanescence had any connection at all to the Christian music scene. While Ben and Amy are both committed Christians, it's the guitarist who has the most intense involvement with his faith. This extends to his tattoos, which include a cross on his finger and a detailed rendering of the life of Christ across his arm. For him, his beliefs are a personal thing, not tied down to any particular church dogma or set of rules. "We never said we weren't Christians," he said after the initial uproar. "We just said we weren't a Christian band. Then all of a sudden, we were quite evil." Ben is, however, used to such small-minded knee-jerk reactions, both within and without the so-called Christian community. "I used to visit a church that happened to openly support President Clinton," he told Stranger Things magazine. "I remember more than once seeing people on the street in front of the church who were opposed to Clinton's stand on homosexuality. These people had their small children with them, holding up signs that said, 'God hates fags.' The children weren't even old enough to know what homosexuality was. All they knew was that they were supposed to hate them." Appropriately enough, Bring Me to Life, Evanescence's biggest hit, is about open-mindedness. It's a quality Ben values above all, and perhaps one of the reasons why he's regarded as a perfectionist who has difficulty finding anyone he's comfortable working with creatively. It's as well then that he and Amy found each other, and that they blend so well. Light and darkness, beauty and power. Together, this combination forms the genius at the heart of Evanescence.
People to hear our music however they can, and since the CD's right now, to go online and to download it to hear it and see if they want to buy the album, that's totally great. I encourage that, but we hope that they'll like it enough to go buy the album when it comes out.
And we have faith in the people who, if they really like our music,
they want to support us.
They're going to be cool enough to want to support us and realize that if they don't, then the record label gets our firstborn child.
Despite the years of hard work, even Evanescence themselves sometimes feel like they're an overnight success. With Fallen and its accompanying hit singles topping every chart, their days are a whirlwind of concerts, interviews, promotional appearances, and video shoots. Yet with such mass acceptance comes great pressure. Can the follow-up to Fallen hope to match its predecessor in terms of sales, impact, and critical acclaim? Evanescence are quietly confident that it can. After all, Fallen was hardly the first thing they'd written, and the only reason that Origin didn't have great success is that no one outside of Arkansas got a chance to hear it. This is borne out by the fact that many of the songs on Fallen were amongst their earliest creations, tracks they'd already recorded on their self-produced EPs. Other old songs have been played in concert and still stand up well alongside their more well-known brethren. Ben and Amy's great advantage is that they have on their side both youth and experience. Still barely in their early 20s, the duo have nearly 10 years of writing, recording and performing experience behind them, and have already created a sound that is uniquely their own, with a multi-platinum hit album to prove that it works. Not a bad start for a musical career. The fact is, Evanescence can now do whatever they want. They certainly won't be as fleeting and vanishing as their name suggests. The next album can only build on Fallen's success. This is only the beginning.
Thanks for buying Maximum Evanescence. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.